going?
Great. How are you?
Really good. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that you have a little studio set up there.
I know I have a company that has a podcast.
Hmm.
So I've got like the whole thing set up.
Right on.
That
Yeah,
makes my
that's a
life
nice,
easy.
nice RE20 mic there.
Oh, thank you. I know. Like, doesn't Joe Rogan use it? I'm official.
Does he? Does he use
I don't know.
RE20?
I'm just
Probably.
kidding.
Right on, Corinne. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So our podcast is about your journey in the music industry and how you got into music and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, that's a long story.
I've got time. I'm not sure how much time you have.
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, first of all, tell me about where you grew up.
I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, so almost Canada.
Okay.
And I think, we're in June and I think they just got rid of snow. So
Oh my
I'm now
goodness.
in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's much warmer and I like it much better. I had enough snow as a child, so I got out of there.
That's that's good. How did you get into music originally?
My grandmother was my biggest influence, honestly. I had a piano. My dad had a piano, and I would tinker on that when I was little. And then she just loved to have me. She was so proud. I was the eldest grandchild, and I was one of the only ones that lived locally to where she was.
Mhm.
So she was an organist and a pianist in church. And so she would play things and have me dance around and sing when she had guests over. And so she was breeding a performer. And so that's kind of how I started to get into it. But yeah, I played music my entire childhood, either just self-taught piano or cello when I was in middle school, high school.
Mhm.
I also played bass in high school, so I definitely was lucky to just have a musical family.
That's great. Were you in you said you played cello, so were you in the school orchestra or something?
Yeah, I did that for a while. I definitely didn't like to conform. So there was a point where I think it was actually when I was about 16, my parents got divorced almost the same year that my grandmother died. And
Ugh.
so I just was like, I'm going to change my life. So that's when I set the cello down and picked up the bass. But yeah, I did, choir and orchestra in high school and stuff. And it was fun, but I just didn't like that it was regimented. I
Mhm.
wanted to do my own thing. So that's kind of how I merged into what I ended up doing.
Rad. So when you got the bass, what drew you to bass?
My dad was actually a cellist in high school and in college. And when he went to Princeton, actually,
Wow.
which I didn't go to an Ivy League school, that's for sure, to his disappointment. But he also played bass. So he had this old, like, Fender copy. I think it was a Maya. And he had like an old, like, 4x10 cab. And
Nice.
so I just was like, I was listening to a lot of like Bush and Nirvana and Silverchair, like, all of these grunge bands, and I
Mhm.
loved it. So I just started playing along with the radio, and that's kind of how I learned bass.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
awesome. Just played along to
yeah,
the songs you would hear on the radio?
yeah. It's kind of like that girl in School of Rock who plays cello, and then Jack White's like,
Oh.
"Cello, you got a bass."
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty much what I did. But I was definitely very attracted to rock as a younger person. So it made more sense to play bass as a rock, as a rock thing than a cello, obviously.
Sure, yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. Did you start bands in high school and stuff?
I played for a very short period of time. I played in like a, you know, basement cover band kind of thing just for fun.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I didn't really, play much in bands until I graduated and went into the army as a band player.
Wow, okay. So, from high school, you enlisted in the Army.
Hmm.
And did you go in as a musician? Like, tell me about this.
Yeah.
Wow. I've
Yeah.
never heard of anyone doing that. I've seen, like, a buddy of mine was in the Marine Corps, and you'd watch them come out, and their band comes out and stuff. And I was always curious, like, how how
Yeah.
do you get that to roll?
I know. Yeah, they audition musicians like any other gig. So basically, I auditioned as a bass player. I signed up pretty much the day I turned 18. My high school life was a little bit tumultuous with my parents' divorce and everything. So
Mhm.
I was ready to hightail it out of there. So
Sure.
I actually turned 18 in October of my senior year, and I was signed up basically the day I turned 18. And then I shipped out to basic June, 2 weeks after I graduated high school.
Whoa.
So I was ready to go, no
Sure.
fear, fortunately for me. And yeah, I went in as a bass guitarist. So you still go through like regular basic training and do all the soldier stuff, but I was hired as a bass player, which was kind of crazy.
That's really awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I
really
liked it.
awesome. So then, did you have to do tours and stuff, like go overseas? Like, how
Yeah.
does that work with your
So
role?
essentially, yeah, the band guys. So if you're a bass guitarist, basically you play, rock in rock bands. And I was in a salsa band, I was in a jazz combo. So I kind of had to learn everything on bass. But when there's like the marching band, you play bass drum, which is kind of funny.
Oh, so you're
They
just going
they
like
switch you.
doom doom
Yeah,
doom.
exactly. Or you end up playing cymbals or like one of the percussion instruments.
Percussionist. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I actually deployed in OIF 2, so that was 2004, to Baghdad, and I spent a year there. And when the band travels, it's kind of like multiple things that you end up doing. Obviously are boosting morale, playing music, but you also augment military police. So we would do, gate guard and x-raying cars, for the contractors, Iraqi contractors that were coming onto the base,
Mhm.
and quick reaction force, which is where you go and investigate if something, if a missile comes in, if an RPG comes in or something like that, investigating it, making sure no one was hurt, that kind of thing. So you have kind of two duties over there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was for about a year. And then I came back and was really happy to be home.
And you're still with the Army now, though, right?
I'm not.
Oh, you're
I
not.
actually, no, they wouldn't allow purple hair.
Oh, good
That's why I
point.
got out.
The first day you were
No,
out, you dyed the hair purple.
I know. Yeah, pretty much. That was pretty much the case. No, I actually got out of the military, I guess it was about 3 years ago now.
Mm.
And I did tour with the military, and I spent 6 years doing, essentially I transitioned where I was singing a lot as well in army bands and stuff, and I started writing and releasing my own music. And I played down on the mall in DC on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial for a Memorial Day recognition kind of day. Rolling Thunder was having if you're familiar with Rolling Thunder, it's where it's a lot of Vietnam vets, but they come through on their Harleys, their big bikes,
Oh, cool.
which
I
is why
I
it's
hadn't heard of
called,
it.
yeah, so that's why it's called Rolling Thunder. But they come
Okay.
in to just raise awareness for, the benefits of vets, and, making sure that that voice is still heard.
Mhm.
So they invited me to go play for that. And when I happened to be down in DC playing, and I was playing my own original music for that, there was a representative from Army Marketing who was like, you should come and do this, officially. So I actually spent 6 years as, for lack of a better word, a sponsored artist. I was still an active duty soldier, but I was playing
Mhm.
my own music. And that's when I ended up doing Warp Tour and a bunch of stuff under Army Marketing. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it was great, but also kind of disturbing because no one else had had that job before,
Mhm.
and they were trying to be a record label, but the Army isn't necessarily very good at that. So there was a lot of tumultuous experience with that, creative differences, shall we say. So I did
Sure.
that for about 6 years, and then I was like, "All right, that's enough. I'm out of here."
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so that's what it meant by when I read that you were the first artist to be endorsed by the a branch of the military as far as like original music goes.
Right. Yeah, because there are lots of army bands who, they play cover music or traditional classical music, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
but they're not typically playing any kind of original music.
Sure. Well, tell me real quick about, so you said when you first joined as a member of the band in the army, you were in multiple bands. You said like a salsa band and a rock
Yeah.
band. Like, are those bands that are just formed on
Yeah.
base? Do they tell you, okay, all right, Corinne,
Mhm.
you're gonna join this salsa band now?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
really?
So the 40 people that were in my unit, depending on what the needs were, so obviously for like Black History Month, there were certain types of music that we would play to, tribute to that community. And during, Asian Pacific, there would be other things or Hispanic recognition, so we would have all of these different things. And then for all like the hoity toity, like officer events, they would want like background jazz music. So I had to
Sure.
learn how to play that. And then there was commercial music like pop and rock that we would play at, different festivals or when the big like the battalion would have a run where all the soldiers are running together, we would go
Mhm.
play there as like,
Oh, yeah.
lots of like Thunderstruck and, AC/DC, Metallica kind of stuff. So I just learned to play a little bit of everything because they
Wow.
would basically dispatch these different little pieces of the band as these separate entities. So it was still all the same band, but they would split up for these different musical needs. So it was fun.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, so you said there's about 40 of you, and then they'd break off you'd break off into smaller groups to start, like, if they
Exactly.
needed, yeah, like you said, like a salsa band or whatever, then you 6 are gonna
Right.
start the salsa band. Wow.
Yeah.
And
And
you
the
would just
bass
play.
players, there's only like one or two in a band in an army band at any given time. So you would end up getting used a lot for a lot of these other things.
Mhm. Wow.
It was
S
fun. It was
That's
a
yeah,
unique
that
experience for sure. I think there aren't a lot of musicians who kind of get that opportunity to learn so many different styles and, have to learn just the nuance of these different things. Obviously like
mhm,
salsa bass is very different from like rock bass, and is very different from jazz bass. So I don't think a lot of people really get that kind of opportunity to feel stretched
mhm, yeah, you're
as
like
far as their
s
instrument. So I that was something that was a really cool experience, and I think it made me a lot more flexible as a bass player in the future.
sure. And were those bands that they put together, were you guys just told kind of what to play? Like, "Here's 15 songs, learn them."
Yeah, basically, the higher ranking people would be the ones mostly to choose it. Better leaders would ask the people in the band for their input. You know,
Mhm,
that was actually a big reason why I ended up leaving the army band and going into the other job. Was I was younger, and obviously, I was just a very vocal contributor to a lot of the bands, and it was not the best fit because I just am not a subdued personality in that situation. So they would be like, "Oh, we're gonna play, more Metallica," and I'm like, "Okay, but let's play stuff that's current." Because obviously, like the older leaders who didn't want to listen to people in their bands would go back to their glory days and want to play the music from that. So
right,
there was
but you
one time that like it was all Dave Matthews Band, and I'm like, "Listen, I get that you love DMB, a lot of people do, but can we also play like some Katy Perry or something?" Like,
Sure.
so there was definitely some of that. And so I was really kind of excited to get out of that situation and just be myself and be able to play stuff that was relevant to me, so that I wasn't just forced to play whatever that person wanted to play at the moment.
Mhm. So tell me about, like, how did you get the green light to go and write your own music and do these tours and stuff?
Well, so I actually all of the music that I wrote was, either prior to this position or, like, when I was on leave. All of my recordings were, paid for by me, recorded on leave, not involved with the military at all, which is actually a really good thing because, you know, even, like, if you look at the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, they create blueprints for all kinds of projects, and
Hmm.
that would normally be considered intellectual property of those people.
Hmm.
However, when the army pays you to do something, to create something, it becomes property of the army because it's work under
Oh,
their
under the
purview.
sure.
Right. And I did not want my music to be owned by the government. So
Yeah,
I
that's
did
probably a
all
good
of that.
call.
Yeah. So I didn't let them fund any of that or be involved in the writing. And they basically recruited me, for lack of a better word, into that position when I already had music written. And I always made sure to keep it very separate. And they would basically look at the lyrics. At the time, I didn't have any explicit lyrics of any kind. And, so they were just kind of like, okay, but they weren't really invested in the content,
Mhm.
they just wanted me to go out there and be likable.
Oh,
So
yeah, kinda like a maybe they kinda using you as, like, a recruiting, like,
yeah, it was
tool?
kind of an ambassador, like community morale, and obviously, like ever since September 11th, there's been a lot of very polarized views of people in a uniform,
Mhm,
and so a big piece of what they wanted me to be was actually show that I was an individual, that I was doing something kind of out of the ordinary, and that was working for me in the army. It was ironic though because like I was the only person that had ever held that job, and you can't they weren't nobody was going to be able to come in and do that job. You know
that
what I
would be
mean?
my question, yeah,
Yeah,
because if you were the
exactly.
first endorsed by this, then it's obviously not, like, a thing that they've been doing for a
Right.
long time.
Yeah, in theory they could join like the army bands, but that's a very, very small community of, soldiers in general. It was more just that they wanted to kind of show a person in uniform as an individual, and kind of because I think there was a point where the uniform was represented so much in media, either in a very good way, especially like on Fox News.
Mhm.
And then there were soldiers who were getting in trouble, like, yeah, Abu Ghraib, and there were some very political associations with the uniform. And so I was kind of a representation of like, look, not everybody in uniform thinks the same because we look the same. And so that was kind of, I think, the initiative for that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's cool, though, that you were chosen for that job. That's
Yeah.
really awesome. So when
Yeah.
you said they kinda scoped your lyrics and stuff, and
In
to make
theory.
sure, yeah, just to make sure you weren't, like, yeah,
Yeah.
doing anti-flag covers or something like
Right. Right,
that.
exactly. And it was interesting because, like, Gilded was actually written, while I was in that position, again, though, on leave and not paid for that by them or anything. But there are songs on that record specifically about some of the misogyny and, rank structure that I felt oppressed by, and there's actually stuff about the people I was working for in some of those songs. Obviously, I didn't mention them by name, and that wasn't really a
Sure.
story I told on stage or anything.
Right, right, right.
But there were definitely points where I felt like my voice was silenced, and the whole point of why I had written those songs was kind of, circumvented in a way.
Mhm,
And that was frustrating. It was frustrating to have them spin kind of some propaganda into something. These songs were very dear to me and very authentic and true. So there's a total cringeworthy music video of me online that they posted to one of my songs called Remember Me. And that was kind of where it went all downhill. They recorded that music video right after I got there. And it's just so it's such an army commercial, and it just made me so uncomfortable, and so that's kind of right from the get. It started rolling downhill.
okay.
Um, yeah, and I was a low-ranking young woman in a place run by older and higher-ranking white men,
Mhm.
and, so it was I fought hard. I fought valiantly in that situation, I think, but it definitely wasn't something I could do long term. Like, just my mental health could not handle it for any longer than I did it. So, it was a good opportunity. I was stoked that I was able to touch the lives of a lot of kids and playing whether it was inner city schools or rich communities or, I kind of went everywhere. I went in every single state in the continental US through that time.
Wow.
And so, yeah, which was cool. But just being able to see people from all kinds of backgrounds and talk to kids that had totally different struggles and kind of be there for them. I didn't necessarily push, like, I never said the army's a good fit for everybody and you should join, or I never
Right.
had that kind of conversation with anyone. But it was really cool to be able to feel like I was, even if for a day, just giving them a mental break and just having a good time, you know?
Hmm. No, definitely. Yeah. Wow. So is it through the military that you got to do like you got put on Warp Tour and you got to sing, like I saw you got to sing the national anthem at like a Miami Heat game and all that stuff. Was that all through
Yeah.
them?
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of all my national anthem performances were in uniform. So I
Hmm.
did a lot of Memorial Day time, around the time of Memorial Day, around, 4th of July, Veterans Day. There were some highly suspect things where I would get booked. There was one year that I actually sang for the LA Lakers and I did their anthem. And then I flew to Pittsburgh to do a Steelers game the very next day and played in the concourse. And so I went from like 75 degrees to 30 degrees and windy in a single day. And I barely survived because it was like shock to my body. But, there was a lot of high demand, especially around those more like patriotic holidays. But I did
Mhm.
it, all year round. And I ended up singing pretty much at every, I think like the top 6 major leagues. So whether it was hockey or football, baseball, soccer even, and NHRA, which those were super fun. Even though I'm not one of those people normally, but the NHRA is super cool. um, but yeah, I ended up doing a lot of that stuff. And then Warp Tour was something I pushed really hard. I'd actually met Kevin Lyman through some friends in common. And he was like, yeah, it'd be really cool to have you out. Like, he dug the music. And I was like, well, let me see if I can get the Army on board with that. And it
Mhm.
was super tough. It was like around a couple years prior. Like I was like, let's do Warp Tour. I think it'd be so great. It'd be great outreach. And they were like, no, those kids have, brightly colored hair and tattoos and they're thugs and whatever. And I was like,
Sure.
no, they're really not. Like it's not like that at all. And they pulled like the guys who, again, like the ones who wanted to silence me were like, look, Rage Against the Machine played and they said that they got the army out of there and they had everybody throw water bottles at them and whatever. And I was like, it'll be fine. I can hang.
Mhm.
So it took a couple years of convincing, but I was finally able to get them to do kind of a test run for 2014. And then we did the full thing in 2015 and we did half in 2016. And then that actually kind of went downhill. So the partnership kind of dissolved halfway through the tour or about a third of the way through the tour. So we ended up leaving even though we were supposed to be on the full tour.
Whoa.
So
The full
yeah.
Warp Tour?
We were supposed to do all of 16 and some stuff fell through and it was not good. So it was one of those things where obviously, you're a soldier, so you just do what you're told. But
Mhm.
I was bummed about that one for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, wow. Did they give you an explanation for it, or it's just yeah, you can't talk
It's
about it?
Yeah, it's like big wig money stuff.
Got it.
So, yeah, it was definitely above my pay grade, but like most things were.
Mhm.
So, I wasn't high ranking, not the whole way through. I was never a high ranking person before I got out. So, that thing with Warped Tour went down, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get out of here. I didn't like how that was handled, and so I
Mhm.
left.
And you left the army completely at that point?
Yep, yeah. So
Oh, wow.
that was in 2016, the summer of 2016, and I was out by February of 17.
Wow.
I was
Yeah,
like,
that's
"Peace out,
quick.
guys."
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that was enough. That was kind of like the, breaking of the camel's back, so to speak.
Mhm. Mhm. So the record that you had out during like when you said "Remember Me," they put a video out for it. That looks like you put that out in 2010.
Yeah, so that was before I actually got into that job.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was the record that I was playing when they initially brought me into the position. Um,
Okay.
and so the Army like slapped an Army logo on that album and put it out. And so while I was in that position, we distributed over 250,000 copies of that
Whoa.
album and Gilded. Yeah, which was crazy. I didn't get paid for any of that, obviously, because it was a government thing. So they're not allowed to promote the forward movement of a soldier. So all of those songs were released, like if you look on Spotify, everything that's up there wasn't released until I was out. Even though the dates are the release dates,
Oh, sure.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it
So,
does. So yeah,
mhm.
so even like Exhibit A, that record was put out by the military as well?
That was the one that wasn't. That was the only one that wasn't. But they repackaged Game Night, and then I released Gilded kind of on my own, and I wasn't allowed to sell it, but I just released it to my fans from Game Night and let them kind of have it, as
Mhm.
just as thank you for the support through all of the changes, and especially those who weren't politically on board with the military. And I gave them a lot of behind the scenes detail and, kind of involved them in the process.
Mhm.
But then the Army started repackaging that, I think, in 2014. And that was what started going out for them. So, yeah, these were all albums that I released personally, but they were repackaged eventually, which is kind of why the greatest hits was, the imminent project was because I was like, okay, I need to like rebrand all of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So you have a greatest hits record coming out? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of these singles that are rolling out now are a part of the greatest hits dual disc that'll be out in January.
Okay.
And I decided to go back to my cello roots and do some that were basically one disc. Disc one is orchestral and there's a lot of like soundtrack kind of sounds to it. I was inspired a lot by the Westworld soundtrack and the Game of Thrones soundtrack. It's like meant to be very epic and cinematic.
Mhm.
And then disc two is all remixes, a lot of trap and, deep house kind of
Mhm.
influence, because that's kind of my other passion. I listen to, Bass Nectar and,
Oh, cool, yeah.
Zed's Dead and Cruella, and I just love that vibe of music, and it has its own orchestral kind of thing. It's orchestrated.
Mhm.
So I just felt like it was a cool representation of past and future and kind of closing this chapter so that I could move forward and as a different, version of myself.
Yeah. Yeah, because I did see I've listened to some of the newer ones like Pieces and Find Your Way, and I did notice that there was the orchestra version of each song, and then you have like a bad one remix of
Yeah.
those songs too. But I didn't really realize that those were tracks from those earlier albums. Like I just
Yeah.
saw okay.
Yeah, so I affectionately call them sister tracks, the orchestral and remix versions. But yeah, they are all reproductions of some of the most popular singles, at least according to my fans,
Mhm.
from my, previous releases. And so since they were repackaged by the Army, I was like, I want to give them kind of a new voice, and pull away from whatever was attached to them before through this propaganda machine. So I was like, this is the best way for me to do that, to really let the lyrics come out and show who I am and go back to what I wanted them to mean in the first place. And again, like close that chapter and be like, all right, I'm going to get the final word on
Mhm.
these, and do something fun and new with them. And then get the next rock record out.
Nice. So
Yeah.
so you've already had the songs chose, like for the greatest hits record, and then it's going to be 2 discs, basically reworked versions of those
Yeah,
old songs. Got it.
exactly. Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
have a new record a rock record that you're writing now.
That's right. Yeah. And it's
Okay.
actually been coming together a lot faster because we're all stuck inside.
Oh yeah.
So, and I definitely, I've always written about things that are, just common to all of us. I think we go through a lot of change in our life and we discover things about ourselves. And one thing that was really interesting to me when compiling the greatest hits was how much of those lyrics, especially like Find Your Way, the first, and it's one of the oldest songs from the collections. And I wrote it 10 years ago or 12, I think now.
Wow.
And I was really young and I was like trying to find myself. And so that was kind of the narrative there. And then I got out of the military and I was like trying to find myself,
Mhm.
and so it was very like self-prophetic in a way. And the fact that it could apply, to myself even in the future. So I definitely write about just the journey that we go through as humans. And obviously, there's a lot going on in the world right now with the pandemic, with the latest efforts in Black Lives Matter. So I have really had a lot to write about, just a lot of time to look inside myself and figure out how my eyes have been opened and, what we all might be feeling together. So it's definitely the writing has come along a lot faster than I was originally expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, there's a lot going on right now, and
Exactly, yeah.
got a lot of time on our hands.
Right, right.
So, do you have like a band that you play with now? Like how's it working out for you right now?
Well, what's funny is that I was trying to reconstruct because my band from previous were army guys, and
Hmm.
so they stayed in. They didn't get out with me.
Sure.
They were a guitar player and a drummer. So I was, in the process of, I'm here in Nashville. There's amazing musicians here. So I was in the process of getting a band back together, and then all of this hit and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be touring with the
Mhm.
band. And I didn't want to take any of those musicians like out of their element for a tour that was not going to happen anytime soon. So instead, I planned on doing a live performance with a local student orchestra and actually
Cool.
having the orchestral version on a live DVD.
Oh
And
wow.
then I'm hoping to do a DJ tour in the UK and Germany in January, February ish, depending on how things work out.
Sure.
And so after that, the rock album will, start coming out and I'll, go back into finding, my new band.
Yeah. So the remixes are done. You do the remixes yourself
Well,
on the record.
no, I didn't do those myself. I produced them with two amazing up and coming producers. So one of them is they're both in a collective called See You Soon, which actually
Hmm.
they just launched, and they're signed with Billie Eilish's management.
Oh wow.
And it's 9 kids from Orlando, and they're they're not famous yet, but I believe they're going to be because they're just brilliant. So Ignacio is one of the bad one. He is in See You Soon, and he's a producer in that group. And then Keikami is the remixer on Sunbeam, and he's
Mhm.
also in that group. His name's
Oh
Kenny.
wow.
Yeah, so they are just monstrous talent, and I was really privileged to work with them. So it was collaborative, but they were really the driving force on those remixes, and I felt like they just had a great vision for where this music is going. So it
Mhm.
was a huge pleasure to work with them.
Nice. Well, you said you wanted to do a DJ tour of the UK. What do you mean by that?
Well, so my vision for it is just basically not even like regular club venues, but maybe more like dance club venues and
Mm.
just playing narrator and singer for a dance party. Like really letting everyone come in and not making it like a show where everyone's watching me, but just where we can have collaborative energy. The songs are all pretty dance friendly. So I
Mhm.
perform them with a DJ, doing a lot of the remix stuff, but really just hosting a party. That's really kind of my goal with that. I think, the more that I can make some of that about, I always like my shows to have collective energy. I don't like the idea of like, okay, you watch me. I'm going to perform and you watch me. And sometimes that is just the vibe of a show, but
Uh-huh.
I like when we all are having that positive energy together. So that was kind of my idea for that, especially Germany is a huge electronic scene. The UK
Mhm.
also has some really great electronic scenes. So that was kind of my plan. And I have a lot of fans in those countries that I've never been able to tour to. So that was kind of the idea behind that.
That's really cool. Yeah, go where you already know you have fans, and that sounds like
Yeah.
cool, like a big party. I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing actually, like how many kids in the UK and Germany are like they follow Warped, and that's
Mhm.
how they got exposed to me. Most of them discovered me through that process. And when they message me on IG or on Facebook, I'm just kind of like, how did you hear about me like over there? But that's the global, we're just a global entity now, this music industry. There's access everywhere. So it's a really cool thing, and I
Mhm.
feel grateful for it that there's enough over there that I could do a tour and have a good time.
Mhm. And it's really cool now with, like, streaming and online, you could actually kinda pinpoint exactly where your more
Yeah,
like, a big group of your fan base might be. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
you could think like, "Oh, like, this song has X amount of spins or it plays," and that could be in, yeah, New Zealand or something, so you should
Right.
probably go there to tour instead of the
Yeah. I'm
US if, like.
actually It's funny because I just my Australian fans are really the most rabid. They're the ones who message me the most, and that's a very expensive place to tour from the US.
I've heard
So I'm like,
that.
"I'll try, guys, I'll try, but I can't promise anything," you know? Not until I get, more momentum going because it's just a very expensive place to tour, but I would love to go there.
Mhm. I've heard, yeah, it's difficult because the
Yeah.
cities aren't very close, so it's like you're
Right.
pretty much flying. You can do, like, 4 shows across the whole country, and,
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Yep,
and
it's
it's
even more than the US.
yeah.
The UK, it's like, "Oh, I can go to Southampton, right to here, right to here, right to here, right to here." Like, they're literally 2.5 hours apart. I actually did I was acoustic opener in the UK both in October or no, I'm sorry, in this past January and the October prior, and, I was like, we literally drove 2 hours and we're to the next venue, and I'm like, what is this? Like, it's just like touring in the Northeast. I wish the whole States was like that. But,
Right.
going from, Phoenix to Houston is like a trek.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
takes 2 days. So it was definitely an interesting kind of lifestyle for those couple tours.
Mhm. Well, that's cool that you got to tour UK out even
Mm.
when you're out of the military.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually didn't do any international touring outside of my deployment to Iraq. I
Uh-huh.
obviously played there while I was there, but otherwise this outreach program for the army was all the US. So I just toured everywhere from, Brooklyn. I mean, I literally went to all four corners. I played Maine, I played Southern Cali, I played Seattle, and I played, Florida. So like and everything in between.
Mhm.
So but I didn't ever go out of the country. That just wasn't, an initiative for that project.
Well, how did you book the tour and make contacts and do the UK?
So I opened for a friend who his name is Kovic, and which is Kovic. He's an amazing pop artist. He's completely independent, and I actually met him through my company, which is called Indepreneur. We do music marketing, and he found us. You know, he listened to our podcast, which is called Creative Juice, and a lot of people listen to that for music marketing tips, and especially doing marketing for the Army for several years and my own marketing prior, I've, got some experience there. So, I've had a good rapport with him over the last 2 years, really. And he was like, look, we're doing this tour. For them, it was a full band tour. He was like, I'd really love to have an acoustic opener. Like, why don't you come over? And also, like, maybe we can pick your brain about some marketing while you're here. And I was like, wow, that sounds super rough. I would hate to do that. Like, I was like, sign me up. So, but he's been a really great supporter of me going to the UK. I've done it twice with him. And it's been incredible both times. And just like finding new fans over there and being able to meet up with fans that have wanted to see me for a while. It's a whole other kind of culture there. They really dig music. So I had a really fun time.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to
Yeah.
go. I'm sure it's even cooler if you get to play shows while you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that sometimes it was cool in that I was touring with UK based people, right?
Mhm.
Like he's from just northeast of London. So it was really interesting because I think if I was touring there with an all American band, you wouldn't really get as much exposure to the culture because you're just surrounded by people like you know? And I
Mhm.
really like being surrounded by people who aren't like me. I got used to that in the military and on the tours that I was doing, like people from all kinds of backgrounds and th- several different primary languages. And, so it was definitely, I like being forced out of my element. And that happened over there because I was the only American present. So that was, I think when you play shows, you tour a lot and you don't necessarily get to see the city or experience the culture because you get there, you play a show, you pack up, you leave.
Mhm.
But because I was with all UK boys, I was able to really get that experience. So that was awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. Well, tell me about your company. You said you guys do music promotion or?
Yeah, so my company is called Indepreneur. My co-founder and I started just about 3 years ago, and we're still fairly young in the scene. We actually got a mention in Forbes a couple weeks ago, just like a
Wow.
mention. It
But
wasn't like,
still.
yeah, but it was great. It was great. I mean, we've really been hustling and trying to. I mean, I think both of us are really passionate about independent musicians being able to find success. There's a lot of musicians who are, always just chasing down the labels and chasing down management. And it's like, look, if you know how to do this yourself, you don't need that. And, um, or at least you can set yourself up to like not get given the short stick when
Mhm.
someone does approach you. Like, get your own fans, get your own customers, make your own sales. Like, you can totally do this. And that's what I did when I moved my first records. Like, I did it myself with like PayPal buttons and you know what I mean? Like, just hand-to-hand combat, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
And so, just teaching musicians how to hustle. I think there's a lot of really rough information out there for independent musicians on, people are buying Spotify plays or buying their way onto Spotify playlists, or there's a lot of really misguided information that I think absorbs a lot of money from independent art and doesn't really provide them any revenue or any education to bring them that revenue. And that's important to me, that independent music can still have a voice and that these people can make enough from that to have viable careers and get their messages into the world.
Mhm.
So that's why we started the company. And we basically just offer training on how to do this, like running ads and doing good email marketing and figuring out different campaigns to generate revenue and tracking your sales and figuring out how to make offers that people want. you know so that's basically what that is, but it's a growing company and it's been really cool to just be a part of that with my business partner. He's also brilliant and very controversial in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
Wow, that's awesome. How many artists do you have right now?
Well, we have an agency that we keep to basically a dozen clients. We don't do a lot of agency stuff. Most of it is self-paced training. So,
Mm,
because we really want artists to learn how to do this themselves, even with the agency, we try to keep them really self-educated on the process so that they don't have to hire us forever. We're not really in for the money making agenda, as I mean, and I know that sounds silly, like you're in a business, you're trying to make money, but as long as we can pay all of our staff and further the mission, that's really our biggest goal.
mm.
So yeah, so we only have about 12 clients because most of our stuff is a membership online where people can have access to this training and learn to do it themselves.
Rad. That's really
Yeah.
rad. I know a
Oh,
lot
thank
of
you.
people don't. I mean, that's kind of where we started the podcast, just kind of trying to get people's stories on how did you become an artist? How did you play Warped Tour? Like these are
Right.
our questions.
Yeah.
Like I mean, when I was a kid, trying to play guitar and hanging playing in little crappy bands with my friends and stuff. It's like how do you like you'd see certain bands from your town and stuff like really moving their way up you know the
Yeah.
chain, so to speak. And I'm like, how do you do that? How did you do that? How did you get a million plays on Spotify? Like that's crazy
Right.
to me. And
Yeah.
then yeah, so that's rad that you have this organization that's kind of giving people tips and tricks on
Yeah.
what to do because there's really isn't any information out there.
Yeah, well, it's just that label management chase, and the thing
Mhm.
is, like, when you start getting into and not to, this is my nerd side, so watch out. But when you start getting into the tech of it, of SMS marketing and email marketing and tracking purchases and making offers, which is that's a very marketing way of saying, like, telling people you have stuff for sale.
Mhm.
Even the way that a lot of labels and major management do it, we don't agree with. And so some of our like independents are outpacing people on major labels, just with their revenue and their profit margin, and they don't have to pay a commission to anybody. So if those indies were ever like approached by management or a label, they could be like, "Look, I'm already making 45K a month, in this way. What are you going to bring to the table?" And if somebody has that kind of playing card, they're in a situation where they can get a much better deal if they
Mhm.
do bring someone on. So the more people that we can generate like that who can pay their bills and live their life and bring this awesome art into the world, like it's just a huge, huge mission for us.
Mhm.
So, and especially just trying, still doing that myself. You know what I mean? I'm also like working on me. So it's a really great community. And we've been really privileged. Like we have about 1,400 members, and we also sell like standalone trainings, and there's about 8,000 people in that community. So, we're still small, but our community is just so great and self-propelled, and there's so many people in there that I respect. So it's been a really great collective going on.
That's awesome. Like I said, that's such a cool company and like the idea behind it. Like I said, there's a lot of people that have no concept of
Yeah.
how to do this. Like my
Yeah.
dad isn't in the music industry. How do I do this? You know what I mean? Like
Totally,
it's like
totally. There's no shortcuts if you don't have someone like that. So
mhm,
yeah, if you can figure out, how to do it yourself, that's going to be your best bet. So the more people
sure.
that we can enable that way, the happier we'll be.
And we're in totally like a DIY world now as far as like as
Exactly.
music goes, like you don't necessarily need a label or
For
a
sure.
manager or booking agent if you know how to if you have the tools and know how to do it yourself.
Exactly. I would posit that some people in our community are more skilled at some of this stuff than people at these major corporations. And I mean, it's because I watched them do it.
Mhm.
And we've also had some, we have talked to certain management companies and certain labels through references from our previous clients. And, you know, I can't tell you how many people we talk to that just don't get it,
Mhm.
And so it's like, all right, well, we'll try to get the independents to pass you up as fast as we can. If you guys aren't going to listen to us and you don't care about what we have to say, awesome. Then we'll just
Mhm.
lap you. It's fine. So, there's a lot of pride associated with it, but I think, one thing that the Army taught me is that, big corporations and big companies don't pivot well. They can't make fast changes. It's a battleship. So it takes so much of the people in charge to like turn it slowly. And independence, just with the world we live in now, they have the opportunity to like do something new and launch it right now.
Mhm.
There's no approval needed. They can do whatever they want. So that's yeah, it's super fun. I mean, it's a dual thing. Like I've got two careers going on because the company grew, I think, a lot faster than we were expecting. But it means that I get to fight for someone more than myself. And that was kind of the motivation for joining the Army too, is like, how can I make what I love not just about me? And so this is just another place where I get to do that, but also really be myself this time.
Yeah, that's amazing to
Yeah,
have
I feel
full
very
creative.
lucky.
Yeah. Wow. And you get to help these other artists out, which is rad.
I
They'll
know.
always
Yeah,
remember
it's
you for
so
that.
great.
Yeah, you could have the next, Justin Timberlake in your pool of people.
I wouldn't be surprised. We have a lot of talent. We have 2 playlists, but we're working on playlisting because there's just a lot of people who like charge money for placement and stuff like that. And so we're developing playlisting where we are actually paying for advertising on the playlist and sending people to that playlist to listen to this independent music and be like, look, there might be a stigma about independent music, but like we have one called independent pop and we have one called I Miss the 80s, which is like a lot of 80s inspired, because that's a
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean?
Oh
There's
yeah.
tons of
It's
80s inspired music out
uh,
there. And when you listen to
especially
these playlists,
nowadays.
yeah, exactly. And so when you listen to these playlists, like you would never know that they weren't signed. You would think that they were signed because they sound so good, you know? So a lot of these people can't pay for that kind of advertising themselves. So we're putting all these people on these playlists and, running IG ads to Spotify, which you've probably seen some of those yourself, just being on IG. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, go listen to this now, swipe up.
Yeah,
And
totally.
so we're doing that for our community because, some of these people need a Spotify lift and they deserve it because they're good, you know?
Mhm.
So it's super fun. It's super fun.
I never heard it makes sense. I just never heard of people paying to be like playlisted on Spotify, but
Oh man, it's
I
a
mean, it should.
thing.
Oh yeah, because you'd see people doing that for you know Instagram and YouTube and stuff.
Yeah.
So I could totally see that as a thing. It never crossed my mind, but it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
It used to be like venues were pay for play, and that
Yeah,
still
I remember
happens.
that. Yeah, especially in
Yeah,
Los Angeles, there's a ton of those. Like, if you didn't
and
show up
they're
with like a grand, you weren't going to play that night.
exactly. So there's been that for a long time. And it just goes to show like how much money makes the music world go round, right?
Mhm.
So that's what we're trying to, teach our community is that you don't have to pay someone else to do this for you. And if you don't have $2,500 to pay that guy, like you don't have to, you can do this. So I love the empowering message of it and the feedback we get from the community. Like it's just amazing what these people do once they have the tools. They're creative and they're figuring out how to mix their artistry with these big tech stacks with all of these things, you know? So it's just impressive. You just don't know what's out there until you have the opportunity to see it, you know?
Mhm. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Like I
thanks.
said, that's such a rad idea. I'm gonna check out your company definitely a lot more, or dive
Yeah.
into it, but see what
Yeah.
it's all about. That's really
I'll hook
rad.
you up. Let me know.
Cool. Yeah, we'll chat about it after this. Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. Well, I have one more question for you. Your story is incredible. Like I said, I've never had anybody on that has ever had like the experience in the military and playing with the military band. Like that's super interesting to me, especially like I said, I went to my friend's like graduation from boot camp and you see the band and you're like, how do you get that job?
Right.
like,
Exactly. Yeah.
like that's so rad.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
For sure. I mean, marketing yourself is part of the gig now. And a lot of people they feel like, oh, marketing, right? Like the word is overused so much. But you have to like get out there, put yourself out there, not be afraid of being salesy and, nerd out on it a bit because it's just, if you see especially independent artists who are doing the thing, they're enabling themselves and that's what they're doing. They are marketing themselves, but in the most authentic, true way possible. It's not enough to just put your music out and think that something's going to happen, you know?
Mhm.
And that's how the role of a musician in this world has shifted. People will expect more from you. And I think that that's great. But some people are like, man, I have to make a video of myself. And it's like, yeah, you do,
Mhm.
So I would say, know that you can do it yourself. Know that no one has to pull you out of the position you're in. You don't need to wait for someone to save you and bring you there. You can do it yourself. You just have to find the right resources and work really hard.
Bringing it backward.